Welcome to the most prestigious of gaming awards ceremonies there is, Pariah 695's video on all the games that I played throughout this year, at least all the cool ones. Because I actually played a decent number of new games this year, which has not been the case for the past, 5 years, where I play maybe 1 to 3 new games a year. I'm just always behind the times. I'm usually playing older games from several years ago. I just never get on the new stuff very much, but I made a bit of an effort this year to play more new games, and I actually managed to. Turns out you can make a lot more time for playing video games when you can make money off of it thanks to a YouTube channel. And I'd like to recommend all the cool things I played this year, but for a lot of these games, if I tried to make a dedicated video for it, no one would watch it. So here's my way to put them all together and highlight all the cool stuff from this year that I played. There's a lot of cool games that I wanted to get to this year that I just didn't, unfortunately. Like Rivals of Aether 2 came out, I picked it up, haven't had time to play it yet. Haven't played the Elden Ring DLC, haven't played Shady Knight. Lots of cool games that I wanted to play but just didn't have time for. But it is what it is. These are the games that I did manage to play in this year. And by the way, this is not a top 10 or anything. I don't care. These are just the cool games I played this year. I didn't even pick a game of the year. How about instead of attributing pointless accolades to games, we just talk about the games themselves. So let's get into things. First thing I'm going to talk about is Shadow Generations. I already did a lot of videos about this, so I'm not going to go into it too much here. But I really enjoyed Shadow Generations. I made the prediction that this would be Sonic Team's best game since Sonic Generations. Not only was I correct about that, but I would say they actually outdid my expectations. I think this is legitimately one of the best Sonic games that's ever been made. Really fun gameplay, really fun level design, no huge, major, glaring issues that a lot of Sonic games suffer from. And the real shocking thing to me was that I loved the story, which I was really not expecting from this game. I'd actually say that it's one of my favorite stories the Sonic series has ever had. Crazy, but I'm very happy to be saying that, and I hope that is a good sign for things to come in the future. It's a rare thing that I get to say that Sonic Team knocked it out of the park with this game, but they kinda did. Shadow Generations is excellent. And while we're talking 3D Sonic games, I'd also like to highlight Penny's Big Breakaway. Also did a video on this game, also excellent. Made by Evening Star Christian Whitehead Studio, responsible for Sonic Mania, and now they move on to this 3D Sonic-esque platformer, and they unsurprisingly killed it with this game. It's super fun, really great movement, really great levels. Some problems here, like the bosses are pretty whack, and there's definitely some polish issues. This game is a little on the buggy side, unfortunately. But it does very little to hamper the enjoyability of this game. It's got great visuals, great music. It's just a great all-around game. One of my favorite 3D platformers that I've probably ever played. And it's pretty interesting to see Sonic Team go up against Christian Whitehead, both releasing 3D Sonic-esque platformers in the same year. And surprisingly this time around, it's actually a tough competition about which one I like more than the other. That certainly didn't happen the last time they released games in the same year as each other. It's also surprising to see that the Sonic Team game is the one that's really polished this time around. It's like we've entered the backwards world. But while they are both excellent games, I do think I enjoyed Penny's Big Breakaway a bit more than Shadow Generations. That game has some things over this, like the really good story. But the general game design ideology of Penny's Big Breakaway is more something that I jive with, because the thing I like most about Shadow Generations is using the spear gliding to break a lot of the level design and turn it into more of a physics-based platformer than it really is. And Penny's Big Breakaway is a game where it's just the cool physics stuff. That is the game. The cool movement mechanics here is not due to glitches, it's due to intentionally designed mechanics, and the level design is built to facilitate those mechanics in really cool ways. But anyway, that's enough pitting this game against Shadow Generations. They're both excellent games, and I highly recommend both of them. Shame that apparently Penny's Big Breakaway did not sell very well, and apparently the studio had to lay some people off because of it. I hate seeing that kind of thing, man. You make a fantastic game, and you're not rewarded for it. I highly recommend checking out Penny's Big Breakaway if you haven't, especially if you're a Sonic fan. I think this is a must-play. Hey, look at this! We got another 3D indie Sonic-like game here, but a very different one. This is Dynacat, which is a game that takes a lot of its influence from Sonic 3D Blast, of all things. Yeah, we got ourselves an isometric 3D platformer here that's certainly not trying to hide its influences in any way. And I know looking at this game, it might not seem like anything all that amazing, but temper your expectations here. This game was made by, like, I think 2 people. And while it might not be the most extravagant production in the world, I do still think it's quite a fun game. The physics are surprisingly good, and the level design is not too shabby either. It's got a neat little boosting mechanic where after running for a while and building up speed, you can activate the boost mode, which functions kind of like boosting in the Sonic games. But because you can't activate it whenever you want, there's a big emphasis on keeping your flow going and not screwing up, not bumping into walls and such. Kinda ends up feeling quite a bit like Sonic Advance 2 to me, actually, because you get a lot of these like long straightaways where you're just boosting forward and looking out for the next obstacle and how to tackle it. There's also a number of collectibles in all the levels you can try to hunt down, and they're quite fun to actually get. Most of them are on, like, the kind of top route optimal path. If you hit everything correctly, then you'll usually get almost all of them on a run. So it's not like that annoying, like, scour around all over the place for collectibles. It's kind of just like, hit that clean playthrough, and you'll get everything. That gives you access to the special stages, which just use the traditional gameplay system. You just gotta collect all these things and make it to the end in time. They're quite fun, actually. And the boss fights in this game are surprisingly really good. Rare for this kind of game, but they take good advantage of the physics-based nature of the mechanics here, and there's a lot of opportunities to get in a lot more damage on the bosses when they're vulnerable to speed them up. You're pretty much never waiting for your turn to deal damage to the boss. There's always something for you to actively be doing, which I like. So yeah, it is a pretty cool game, and I would recommend it. My biggest criticism for it is kind of, unfortunately, one of the fundamental aspects of this game's identity. The isometric camera really does cause some serious visibility problems, especially when you're running toward the camera. You have way less time to react to what's coming up. You know, there's a reason that Sonic 3D Blast is like the only other isometric 3D platformer you could think of, because there's not a very good camera angle for 3D platforming. You can tell it's a big problem because they put all these button prompts all over the game to tell you when to jump, when to hit the X button, to grapple off of something, because you don't have enough time to actually see these things and identify what you're supposed to do with them, so the game needs to just tell you. And of course, when it comes to the platforming stuff, depth perception can be a problem if you're someone that struggles with that. I could imagine that could be a major problem in this game, so yeah, unfortunate certainly is a problem, but I still overall enjoyed the game and think it's a pretty good time. Weirdly though, Dynacat is not the only isometric action game where you're rolling around at the speed of sound that came out this year. We also have Go Mecha Ball. This is a roguelike twin-stick shooter, where the main gimmick of it is that at any moment you can curl into a ball and start rolling around the arena, and immediately you could definitely see some things about this that are somewhat Sonic-esque. You can tell why this game caught my attention when I first saw it. Rolling gives you increased movement speed. You can do this dash that lets you hit into enemies and also go through projectile attacks, but also just lets you speed around the arena more. You got these boosters that launch you around. You got like quarter pipes to shoot yourself up in the air. There's a lot of cool stuff. It almost ends up feeling like you're playing a shooter as Sonic, or I guess Shadow, you could say. And it's interesting playing a game that has these kinds of movement mechanics, but isn't a platformer. It's a combat-oriented game, and the pace and the feel and the speed of the combat here feels very much in line with like the newer Doom games. There's a lot of enemies, and they're attacking you in all kinds of different ways, and you're shooting them a lot, but you're also flying around this battlefield, bouncing from enemy to enemy all over the place. There's a cool mechanic in this game where an enemy, right before they attack, they have an exclamation mark above their head, and if you hit them with some kind of physical attack, either by bashing into them or hitting them with certain special abilities, that will deny their attack, basically canceling it so they don't do their attack, and you get in an opportunity for some extra damage. So that's pretty cool, I like that. And of course, you got a lot of different weapons and items and upgrades and abilities that you can get over the course of your run. You got different playable characters, and you can make like different builds focused on different aspects of the gameplay. You can build yourself to be really focused around rolling around, make it so that whenever you bash into an enemy, it refreshes the cooldown on your boost, so you can keep on comboing them together, and then increase how much damage you do when you bash into enemies. You can make it so that when you land on enemies, you do extra damage to them. And this game, I find, doesn't have depth perception issues because the camera's a bit higher and you have a really good shadow that tells you exactly where you're going to land. And you can give yourself very movement-oriented abilities that launch you into the air, or give you a big burst of speed or whatever. And you can basically almost not even use your guns very much. Or you can build yourself not really relying much on the mobility and the rolling, and instead you focus on your guns and your abilities. You instead go with, like, high damaging, like, explosives and rocket launchers. You just get really powerful guns. You make it so that, like, switching weapons buffs the one for the next couple of seconds. You know, it's cool stuff. And while that might immediately not sound as fun as rolling around and pinballing off of the little boosters to bash into enemies and stuff, it actually is. It works pretty well. You still do a lot of rolling around just to dodge or cancel enemy attacks or maybe refresh your ability cooldowns or stuff like that. It's a nice little game, and little is something I want to emphasize here, because while this is a roguelike, this is not going to be your next Hades or your Dead Cells or whatever. This is not a game you're going to pour 300 hours into or anything close to that. While it is a roguelike, there's not that much content here, really. There's not a ton of enemy types, and there's not even that many, like, room variants. Over your different playthroughs, you're going to find yourself in a lot of the same arenas repeatedly, and there's not, like, different biomes that you can choose which ones you want to visit on your runs. Like, it's not you beat World 1 and do you want to go to the Swamp World or the Desert World. It's you go from World 1 to World 2 to World 3 and so on and so forth, and each world has the exact same boss every single time you play through the game. While you do have a lot of upgrades and items and weapons you can get, there's not a lot of stuff that, like, really dramatically alters the way you play the game. It's all just kind of different tools for doing the same thing, rolling around and shooting guys. So this isn't a roguelike that has, like, endless replay value that you're gonna do 500 runs of. And it's really not meant to be, I don't think. There's only 4 difficulties here, and you just unlock one difficulty by beating the lower one. And each one introduces a new wrinkle to how it's gonna play. Things like enemies will get a metal skin that you can't do any damage to them with guns until you break it open with either movement or a special ability. You get healing enemies, you get enemies that break open and spawn more enemies when they die, and they just layer on these things on the higher difficulties, and it does definitely get a lot more challenging. Enemies also do more damage, so it means you have to be more on the ball and really learn how to dodge through all the attacks that are being thrown at you. And that's when the game started to really become fun to me, around, like, difficulty 2 or 3. That's when it became challenging. First difficulty is really, I think, just for, like, learning the foundation of what the game is, and then getting into the real meat of things. But then once you beat the 4th difficulty, that's pretty much all there is to do in the game. But I'm okay with that. I don't think that every single roguelike needs to be this time black hole that you invest your entire life into. You know, it's a cool game, you learn how it works, get good at it, beat it a couple of times, and then you're done. I'm totally fine with that. Honestly, it doesn't even feel like much of a roguelike to me. It feels like just a short game that has a little bit of randomization in there to add some variety. And if you're down for that, I would say Go Mecha Ball is absolutely worth checking out. And while we're talking games that are kind of like Sonic, sort of, but are also kind of more so doing their own thing or like other games, I would also like to highlight Berserk Boy. Here we got a 2D action platformer, more so fashioned out of Mega Man, or really I should say it's like Azure Strike or Gunvolt. But there is definitely some undeniable Sonic influence here, not in the direct way the game plays, but in a lot of the design principles. You can see a lot of the 3D Sonic games in here. The main gimmick of this game is you can do an 8-way dash, and when you make contact with an enemy, you mark them, and then you can do like a finishing move to zap them all with electricity, which is where I get the Gunvolt comparison. But that's just for your main ability. Like many Mega Man games, as you beat bosses, you gain their abilities, and that gives you different powers and different movement abilities here as well. You get a fire ability that gives you some melee attacks, and it also lets you drill through the ground, and this is what I'm talking about with the Sonic influence. This is clearly very much inspired by Knuckles, but also is clearly the Yellow Wisp from Sonic Colors. And you get a bunch of other powers as well. You get a ninja power that lets you chain multiple dashes together. You get a flight power, lots of cool stuff. And the game starts to really get a lot more fun as you unlock more of these powers. Because like I said, each one gives you different movement abilities, and it quickly becomes a game where you're swapping between all your different movesets very quickly on the fly. Again, another Sonic comparison. It makes me think a lot of Sonic Heroes, swapping between your different movesets to tackle different obstacles that are built for them. Like I said, while the core gameplay is quite different, the overall general design philosophy behind this game feels very akin to like the Sonic Adventure games. So I think if you like those games, this might be something you're really into. Also, I guess I'll mention that T-Lopes did the soundtrack in this game, and it's good, but it's actually his weakest work, from what I've heard so far. Don't really know what happened here, but I've heard a lot better from him, and I was actually a little disappointed with the music here. But whatever, the game's still really good overall. Berserk Boy, check it out, it's really cool. Okay, so here's a really weird one. Get to work. And I know that you immediately look at this game and you're like, Pariah, what is this on my screen right now? Well, this is one of them getting over it, Bennett Foddy, rage, get to the top and fall down kind of games. However, unlike the majority of these kinds of games, this one is actually, like, sick. It's really fun and has awesome physics-based platforming mechanics. It's ridiculous. You start playing this freaking meme game and you're like, whoa, hold on a second. Why does this game feel incredible? Why is it so legit? Again, I'm gonna compare it to Sonic. This legitimately is like one of the best feeling like 3D roll around in a ball and build up speed and launch yourself off ramps. Like, this feels like a great 3D Sonic-like game. And look at it. As one of these, like, rage type of games, for me at least, it was a complete failure. I did not rage a single time while playing this game. I did my whole first playthrough on stream as well as getting the secret ending, and I just had a blast the whole time. The game is way too fun to be frustrating. Like, it's not bullshit, it's not unfair. Generally, it's a lot more forgiving than a lot of these games tend to be. And with the fantastic controls and physics, you always know that every time you screw up, it's all on you, it's all your fault. You can never blame the game for intentionally being awkward or bad to play or having bad controls or anything. The game feels great, it's super fun, the level design is creative and weird and interesting, and the whole, like, theme of what this is, like, get to work, become a CEO, it's actually quite funny, I found. I can't believe I'm saying it, but I think this is legitimately one of my favorite games I played this year. But that's enough talking about Sonic and games like Sonic. Let's talk about some other games instead. Let's talk about Kitsune Tails. This is a game I mentioned in my video on 2D Mario games, because as you can see, it's very inspired by 2D Mario, and it's really good. This game is extremely blatant with how influenced it is by Mario. A lot of the hazards and enemy types in this game function identically to Mario enemies. They just have a different skin on them, basically. And the game's overall design is very similar to like Mario 3, Mario World, and the new Super Mario Bros. Games. And truthfully, at first, I wasn't digging this game that much, because the new Super Mario Bros. Games already, I was starting to feel like the fatigue of all these types of 2D platformers that are all very similar to each other. And this game really does kind of capture that feel of authentic 2D Mario, in that it kind of just felt like another one of these games. And it was good, I was having fun with it, but it felt very been there, done that. The one thing about this game that I really thought was cool, I guess I'm not done talking about Sonic actually. While you're on a downhill slope, you can slide down them and build up a bunch of speed, but if you press left or right, then it triggers the game's speed caps and instantly brings you down to speed. But just like Sonic 1 with rolling, if you go neutral, then you can carry that speed further, and you can bunny hop to preserve your speed for longer. So then you're looking for like cool opportunities to use slopes to build up a bunch of speed and keep it going for as long as you can, and that's really fun. And that's where I was like, ooh, I like it. It's like Mario 1. That's the kind of stuff I really like with these kinds of 2D Mario games. But there really wasn't a lot of that in the game, because the general level design is much more in line with like the later 2D Marios, which is less to my preference. But then, when you beat the game the first time around, you unlock the second playable character, who is way cooler. The first playable character, you're basically Mario, and it's just like the vanilla experience. But then with the second character, they're like, alright, you got through all the levels legit, now it's time for the fun stuff, because the second playable character has a sword attack that can deal damage to enemies, and if you hit an enemy in the air, then it refreshes your ability to jump, so you can do multiple air jumps, chaining them together. And then you get an air dash that gives you a speed boost, and you can use the bunny hopping to preserve that extra speed. And then you get an upward dash and a dive kick, and all of these abilities get refreshed every time you kill an enemy in the air. And it turns into this crazy thing where you get all this movement mechanics. You can wall jump, or you're flying over the stage. And it's really, really cool and definitely, like, game-breaking, but like I said, you already do the vanilla playthrough to, like, legit play these levels. Now you're just going crazy, and while it's really powerful, it's still very easy to screw up because you can miss enemies or not keep track of what abilities you still have and what has and hasn't been refreshed yet. And I totally find myself going for, like, crazy skips all the time and screwing it up and falling into pits. It's great. It's so much fun. The game's still enjoyable with the first playable character Yuzu, but once you get Kiri, the second character, this game really lights up. And a surprising design choice that I found in this game, there's no collectibles in these levels. Seems weird, you always think of like 2D retro platformers like this having collectibles, but they don't do that here. There's nothing to worry about. It's just about getting to the end of the stage, and I really appreciate that actually, because it means I don't have to slow down and stop and check every little thing and make sure I don't miss anything. I just get to go and enjoy the game's physics and mechanics. And for the real psychos out there, once you beat the game, you get some post-game extra challenge worlds, and they go full-on Kaizo level difficulty for the last few of them, and I thought for sure that I just would not be able to beat these levels, but I actually did them on stream, and it was like a great time. I don't know if this is what Kaizo hacks for Mario games are normally like, but I didn't find this like bullshit or unfair or anything like that. It was just really ridiculously hard level design, and as someone that really enjoys difficult games, I found myself being pushed in a way I rarely am in this kind of platformer, and it was great. Maybe I need to start investigating some Kaizo Mario. Maybe that'll be something I check out one day on the channel. But anyway, yeah, Kitsune Tails, really great game. If you enjoy 2D Mario, absolute must play. And while we're going with retro-style games, I also want to give a brief mention to Haunted Castle Revisited. This was a big surprise this year. This came in the Dominus collection that came out with all the DS Castlevania games remastered. But also, as like a little side note, they're like, oh yeah, by the way, we also made a brand new Castlevania game. This is a remake of the arcade Castlevania Haunted Castle, which is freaking terrible. But this new version of it is like totally reimagined. It's a totally different game, and it's pretty good. Nothing especially remarkable, nothing to like really write home about. You know, the Castlevania series, especially the classic games, they're all basically the same game over and over and over again, and this is definitely one of those. There's really nothing here that you haven't seen before if you've already played these kinds of Castlevanias. It's not especially cool, it's not especially challenging, it's just another 2D Castlevania game, and it's good, and I enjoy it. Hope this is a sign of more new Castlevania games to come, I guess we'll see. But here we go. This is another game like Kitsune Tails, where someone goes, hey, you remember that game from your childhood? Well, now it's a legally distinct version of that, but it's way, 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 way harder. This is Psilosybil, or Psilosybil, whatever, and it is a Crash Bandicoot-style game. Specifically, it is Crash 1 style. You got no slide, no high jump, no extra abilities, nothing. You run, jump, attack. That's the whole game. And just like Crash, you're running down these hallway-style levels, sometimes going to 2D, sometimes running toward the camera. And much like Crash 1, this game really hones in on the difficulty of that game, but it cranks it up to absurd levels. Like, I was interested in this game because I really enjoyed the Crash games, and especially Crash 1. That's my favorite of the originals, and the thing I like about it so much is its difficulty. It's like a surprisingly legit platformer for a genre that is typically for kids and really not that demanding. So when I saw this game and saw how much it's aping off Crash 1, and I heard everyone saying that this game is like crazy, ridiculously difficult, I was like, ooh, let's see what's going on here. You know, I'm pretty good at these kinds of games. How hard is it really gonna be? It's friggin' brutal, man. I would actually say that this game does push it a bit far. Occasionally, it is too hard for anyone to reasonably do. The majority of the game is fine. It's very, very difficult and very unforgiving, but I find that most of what it asks for is not unreasonably difficult, but a couple of things here and there are, and one thing especially that I really disliked in this game was the final boss. That drags on for way, way too long, and it's less about the difficulty that's the problem, and more that it's just a slog. It's basically a giant auto-scroller that you have to sit through over and over and over and over and over and over and over until you basically just memorize what you're supposed to do. So that sucked, and it did definitely leave a bad taste in my mouth when I first beat the game, but I did go back and I started going for like the nutso stuff where you try to get all the collectibles in a single run, and that's where the game gets like really freaking hard, even more so than it already was, but in a way that's actually fine and fun and good. And I did find myself developing the skills to tackle this game's absurdly high difficulty, to the point where I feel like I could tackle these levels reasonably well at this point without dying too many dozens of times. Sadly, I couldn't go for 100% here because that requires getting the time trial trophies, and even going for like the low time, that does require beating all the levels without dying a single time under really strict time limits, and there's no way in hell I'm gonna be able to do that. Still had quite a good time with the game overall, a couple of frustrating bits here and there, but for the most part, an enjoyable challenge. And this game does a really good job of recreating the PS1 visual style, and there's a bunch of options in it for like CRT filters and texture warping if you want that kind of thing. But they totally nail like the look of PS1 games very well here. Music in this game is a bit weak, I feel, and I'd say that this game doesn't have super strong personality. You know, the Crash Bandicoot games, they're bursting with attitude. Like, Crash himself is a very likable character, and it's got all the fun villains and stuff. Psilosybil really doesn't have anything going for it in terms of, like, stuff that's gonna draw you in and like this beyond just a really difficult video game. So I would recommend this game, but only to certain people. If you're like, oh, I like 3D platformers, I like Banjo-Kazooie, even if you're like, I like Crash Bandicoot because of the quirky characters, this game is not for you. Like, if you struggled with Cuphead and you thought that game was too hard, don't get this game. This game will chew you up and spit you out. This is a game for crazy people that like their 3D platformers as hard as they freaking come. But for something that is a little bit more laid back, yet still very cool, Yellow Taxi Goes Vroom came out this year. And this is a very traditional collectathon style 3D platformer. Plop yourself in some big sandbox levels, go around, get all the green gears, and have yourself some fun. I think one of the most interesting things about this game is that it is a tank controls 3D platformer. And you know, you think back to like the PS1 N64 days, and like, oh god, tank controls platformer, what are you doing? It's so bad, please use analog. But this game totally makes it work, and not only makes tank controls functional for a 3D platformer with quite in-depth movement, it's great. It's a really fun game. I think the thing that makes the tank controls work is that the game is really floaty and very generous. Like, you get a lot of airtime here and a lot of opportunity to adjust and try to get yourself where you want to be. And the game is really snappy and responsive. Like a lot of those older 3D platformers, like you turn very slow and it's very clunky and awkward. Here, it's like super fast turning, super fast steering and control and everything. Makes for quite a peppy game where you're launching yourself off ramps super duper high in the air and then looking for your opportunity to land, and you can do air dashes, or you can do like a weird like sideways double jump thing to help get yourself up to higher platforms or whatever. It takes a while to get used to. I wasn't really feeling the game at first. Like, there was a lot of stuff that I saw that I thought I couldn't do, but actually you can do everything on first visit of a level. It's just that there's a lot of stuff here that they don't tell you right away, and it's kind of unintuitive to figure it out on your own. Like, jumping in this game is done by pressing boost and then hitting the brake. That pops you up in the air, but you can only do it either to the side or backwards. You can't do it forward for no particular reason. Also, if you hit the gas right after your boost finishes charging, then you get like a bigger boost that launches you with more speed, and you can get more height and distance off of ramps. And those things the game doesn't tell you until you've completed like several levels, and I don't know why. It's really weird. Once I knew those kinds of things, I was having a lot more fun with the game, so maybe give it a little bit of time, experiment around, see what you can figure out of how to use this friggin' taxi, and the game gets pretty enjoyable that way. There's also a bit of crazy taxi influence here. Some levels you're going to have a timer, they're going to have to take people around, but it's mostly just like a crazy gimmick to keep you going all over the place. It's a very manic game. Obviously, stylistically, you can see it's friggin' like an acid trip. Honestly, I kind of find the style and tone of the game a bit repulsive. It's a bit too, like, memey for my tastes. But the music here is real good, so that's nice. Yellow taxi goes Vroom. Give it a looky-loo. Let's see, what else we got? Oh yeah, Side Order. Technically not a game, it's a DLC, but it's kind of like a game within the game, and whatever, I don't care. It's something that came out this year that I played, and I enjoyed it, so I'm gonna talk about it. It was actually also my first time getting Splatoon 3, and I really enjoyed that game. The Splatoon games just keep getting better and better. But specifically Side Order, I thought was pretty cool. A little roguelike mode for the game. This is something I really like about Splatoon. They're not afraid to experiment and change things up and mess around with the formula. Like, every single game, they've tried different stuff. You know, the first one was very straightforward and safe. You got the competitive multiplayer, you got the single-player kind of platformer-esque campaign. That's it. Then the second game, they added Salmon Run, which is a co-op mode, and then they did a very different, very experimental type of single-player, and that was really cool. Now here in Splatoon 3, they're doing another weird, different experimental single-player mode, and I think that it works for the most part. Definitely not the best roguelike I've ever played. It is, after all, just a roguelike mode in a larger game. There was clearly some limitations here in terms of, like, how much budget they had to make, but, I think that they did a pretty good job overall with this. You know, it's got a whole new enemy faction with different enemy types and their own functions. You got all these objective-based modes that are kind of like a single-player version of, like, the multiplayer equivalents, which I think are pretty cool. Not that many bosses, but very good ones that I don't mind fighting time and time again. You know, a little thing about this game that I really like, every time you replay a mission, it records your best time. And it's like, who cares? It doesn't matter. It's all like roguelike randomness. You're going to have different power-ups going into every mission, so you can't really compare it. But it does feel really good to come back to a mission that I've done several times and then do it way better than ever before and get a new time and be like, yeah, I did that so cleanly. You start to develop like little strategies of how to optimize these missions and get them done as fast as possible. And of course you got all the roguelike stuff, picking which weapon loadout you want to use and choosing your build of what kind of items you want to get, and that also determines what kind of challenges you're going to be facing. So it's like, oh, that item's really good, but that's going to be a really hard level, and am I well equipped enough to be able to handle that? I don't know, there's some decision making there that I find fun. Aesthetically, of course, as always, Splatoon killing it. Really cool visual style, this very clean, sleek, digitized world. Music is freaking amazing. Story, much lighter here than normal, but you still get the big crazy epic climax, and that's a really good time. Really good music for that final fight as well. I'd say my biggest criticism for Side Order is that it doesn't have that much longevity, and unlike something like Go Mecha Ball, it wants to have that. You know, it wants you to complete it with all the different weapon types, and it really just doesn't have the legs for that, in my opinion. There's not enough variety here. You know, if it had twice as many everything, twice as many missions, twice as many bosses, twice as many enemy types, then sure, I could see it lasting that long. But as it is, I really start to feel like I had seen everything and done everything by like my 4th or 5th playthrough. And it wasn't even that long for me to beat the game initially. Like, it's not that hard. I beat it after only like 3 attempts, after like 3 hours of play or something like that. So it's a light mode. Like I said, it doesn't really compare to actual dedicated roguelike games, but I don't think that's really a problem here. Considering this is a part of a much larger game that has so much more to it, I think the best way to enjoy Side Order is not to plow through it all in one go, but to just add it to your rotation of things you do when you load up Splatoon 3. Sometimes you do some multiplayer, sometimes you do some Salmon Run, sometimes you do some Side Order runs. I think that is the best way to enjoy this. And I really have high hopes for it in the future, because one of the benefits that Splatoon 3 has as a game is that it just builds off of the previous games. You know, 2 builds off 1, 3 builds off 2. So there's a lot of potential for Side Order coming back, and now they have everything from this game, and then they can add even more stuff on top of that. I think a co-op Side Order type mode would be really cool if you get a squad of like 2 other buddies, and you go through like this hour-long gauntlet of missions together as a team coordinating. Add some mutators that you can throw on, and you can just stack as many as you want to make it even harder and give you more rewards. That could be really friggin' sick. Hopefully we'll see. Who knows what the future of Splatoon is, but I love these games. Splatoon is legitimately like one of the best shooters out there these days, and it's become one of my favorite Nintendo franchises, which is nuts considering how new it is compared to everything else. But it's just so good, man. Every single game has been excellent and just gotten better and better. I'm a fiend for Splatoon. I love being a squid and a kid, and I can't wait for more. But I actually played a number of other new shooters this year, one of which being on the polar opposite to Splatoon in terms of tone and style. Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2. I am not a Warhammer guy, I'm not into 40k, not into that universe or any of those games really. But this game did look pretty cool, and a lot of my friends got it. They're very into the Warhammer games, and I was like, okay, sure, why not? Let's give it a go. And I was pleasantly surprised to see that it's actually quite good. It's very old school in its approach. It feels like a game ripped out of time. Like, this does not feel like a modern shooter. This feels like an Xbox 360 era shooter, bro. You know, it doesn't have no friggin' battle pass. It doesn't have any microtransactions or loot boxes or any of that shit. It's a video game. You buy it, and it's got a campaign, a co-op mode, and competitive multiplayer. And you go in there, you play it, and you have fun. And it's really straightforward and simple. In case there's any confusion there, when I say this doesn't feel like a modern shooter, I mean that in a very good way, because modern shooters have a lot of annoying crap in them. There's no fucking heroes, there's no healers, there's none of that shit. It's a goddamn shooter. You create your class of what weapons and grenades and whatever you want to use, what abilities you want to have. You go in, you have regenerating health, and you shoot guys, and you have a good time. One of the things I like about this game is it's not just a shooter, it actually has quite an emphasis on melee combat as well. It's got invincible iframe dodges and a parry mechanic. It feels a bit like if you took like Gears of War and took out all the cover stuff and made it a lot simpler, but then mixed it a little bit with like Dark Souls-esque combat. It has a neat little armor system where before you start taking health damage, you start taking armor damage, and you can do executions on enemies, very Doom 2016 style, to refill your armor. So it's about keeping that armor up, because in the co-op modes, your health doesn't regenerate. You need health packs for that. So you want to try to avoid taking health damage as much as possible, especially on those higher difficulties. So really managing your armor becomes very important, and you gotta be smart with how you approach it. Look for those opportunities to get those executions. And these fights can become so hectic that they actually work very well while you're doing the animation. You become invincible, and it gives you a bit of time to just like get your bearings on the battlefield and like plan your next move. That works out really well. I've been playing this a lot with buddies, and we've been having a lot of fun in both the co-op and the multiplayer. You got the different classes in the game, all have access to different things, and they're all pretty fun. Like, even the sniper class, which I normally am not into that kind of thing, I actually find it works really well, and I enjoy it. The co-op mode is, I definitely think, the meat of this game. That's what you'll be spending most of your time doing, and it's kind of like a little bit of a Left 4 Dead-esque game, where you have, like, these hordes of enemies that are coming at you, and you're plowing through them, trying to make your way forward, and every run is a little bit different. It does have, like, the AI director that, changes up the enemy spawns and what resources you're going to find along the way. Campaign is alright. The story is a complete waste of time, in my opinion. Didn't care for that in the slightest, but the actual gameplay I felt to be pretty enjoyable. The AIs at launch were completely useless. It's probably a lot more fun if you play with friends. This whole game is more fun when you play with friends, I find. The multiplayer mode is good, but it suffers from a problem that plagues the entire game, but it especially is bad here. There's very little content here. There's only 3 game modes, and the team deathmatch is kind of whack in my opinion. And there's only 3 maps, so there's not a lot of variety to get out of here. And that affects the co-op mode as well. There's not that many missions, and there's not that many enemy types, and there are a number of weapon types, but a lot of them are really similar. Like, there's way too many just machine guns in this game. You need a lot more weapon variety. So, you know, it's not the best shooter I've ever played. Like, I'll definitely take an actual Gears of War game over this any day of the week. But I think that this game came at a really good time, where, like, modern multiplayer shooters are all freaking annoying with all their heroes, and it's all, like, colorful and vibrant or whatever, and I've started to get real tired of everything looking like a freaking Pixar movie. I actually find something that looks like a gray-brown dude bro shooter very refreshing in today's market. And I'd say if you hearken for the days of getting in an Xbox Live party with your friends and loading up some Halo 3 or Gears of War 2, this is a game that will really scratch that itch for you. They really capture that specific vibe of that era of online multiplayer shooter really well. And feels good, man. It takes me back to the good old days. Here's one that I was also similarly surprised I enjoyed as much as I did. Helldivers 2. This was a game I was looking at going like, I don't know. It doesn't really seem like my kind of thing, but my friends were playing it and I decided to pick it up, and I actually found myself loving this game. It's very different than any kind of shooter I've ever played before. Like, yeah, it's a co-op shooter, it's mission-based, but the thing that really makes this game so different to me is that you're dropped in these giant-ass maps. They're almost like mini open worlds, and it's really freeform and open with how you want to approach completing the mission. You can tackle it from any angle, do all of the little sub-objectives and side missions in whatever order you want, in whatever way you want, or you can just ignore a lot of that stuff and just focus on your main objective. There's a lot of room for team coordination with how you all want to build your kit and your gear and what you go in with. The stratagem system is very cool. You can bring in like airstrikes or crazy overpowered weapons and stuff. In many ways, it reminds me of Metal Gear Solid 5 with the open-endedness to how you can approach the game. And I think that was definitely intentional by the devs. There's a lot of stuff here that feels very reminiscent, like the controls and the versatility of your character. But even down to very specific things, like when you complete the mission, you have to go to the drop zone, and the dropship has to come, and I'm just hearing, like, this is Pequod, I'm at the LZ. Like, it's exactly that same kind of thing. And this is one of those games for me that the real fun of it is in climbing up the difficulties as you level up, get the better gear, get the better upgrades. Then you can start to moving on to those higher difficulties. And at the high levels, this game gets crazy, dude. It is an entire army that's trying to wipe out 4 people all the time. And I frequently find myself wondering, how the heck are we going to overcome these odds? Which is something very rare I find in a co-op game. You know, a lot of games like this, action game shooters, they're very much the power fantasy. They want to make you feel like the cool, powerful guy. This game makes me feel like I'm out of my depth and in way over my head. And it's only through relying on my team and through the support of your airdrops and your bombing raids and stuff like that that you're able to just scrape by and complete these objectives. It's really awesome. Like, you're not the hero guy here. You are a soldier in an army, and you're doing your part. And that's definitely a big part of this game, because aesthetically this game is really riffing off lots of old school movies, but especially Starship Troopers. It's like basically a rip-off of that. But it's really fun, it's very funny. I love all the stuff about democracy and freedom and protecting Super Earth. It's great, and it just leads into such hilarious banter with your friends. Like, you have the robot enemy faction, and they're all just blatantly Terminators, but the real thing that makes them the heinous villains that must be stopped is that they're socialists. That's just so funny. And just recently, the game had the big update. They added the new enemy faction, urban environments, vehicles, very cool stuff. I'm excited to jump back into more Helldivers 2. But oh my god, what's this? What is this on my screen? Is this Call of Duty? Is this CoD Black Ops? Pariah? What's going on here? Well, here's the thing. I don't give a flying fuck shit about Call of Duty. I don't play those games. I don't like those games. I don't care about them, except Black Ops 3. That game was sick as hell, but whatever. While I am not a fan of Call of Duty, I am a very, very big fan of Call of Duty Zombies, the survival co-op horde mode of those games. For the uninitiated, it might seem a bit weird to specifically be a fan of just the co-op mode of Call of Duty, but that's because the Zombies mode is really a very different beast than what you find in campaign or multiplayer with CoD. It's where the developers are actually allowed to be creative and do cool, weird, interesting things. And I love it. I've been playing Call of Duty Zombies since literally the very beginning, when there was just one map all the way back in World of War. I've always stuck with this mode. I've always enjoyed it a lot. I have bought multiple Call of Duty games, and I've not played a single match of multiplayer or a single mission of campaign. I would literally buy them just to play Zombies mode, and I have no regrets. I have hundreds of hours into some of these games. It really is that good to me. And again, that might seem weird to those that aren't very familiar with Call of Duty Zombies, but it's very different than your typical, like, horde-based survival co-op shooter. Like, this is not just a horde mode. This is not like Left 4 Dead. This is not like Killing Floor. It's really its own beast. It's really hard to get into what makes CoD Zombies so different and unique and fun without really getting into the weeds of it. But I'd say a really big appeal to these games for me is the economy and the progression of a match. It's not just kill zombies until you die. As you kill zombies, you get points, which you can then use to buy upgrades, but also unlock areas of the map. You have to pay to open up doors, and doors open up new areas that give you new opportunities for other upgrades, and there's a lot of, like, mission objectives where you're running around the map trying to do things under a certain time limit, or bring this object over here, and then you gotta lock down and fight off zombies in this area for a brief period of time, and then there's a lot of cool stuff like that. Lots of little quests to go on to give yourself more power-ups and more opportunities to let you survive for even longer. Each map is so much more than just a map. They all feel like their own game in a way. They got their own unique gimmicks, their own unique enemy types, their own unique perks and mechanics, and all kinds of weird stuff. You get the crazy, super powerful wonder weapons and the special abilities, and you pack-a-punch your guns to make them more powerful and give them, like, special attributes and stuff. And every game introduces new wrinkles, new gimmicks, twists the formula in some weird way. You know, there have been better Zombies games than other ones, but I have always enjoyed pretty much every single one, at least the Treyarch made one. Sometimes the other Call of Duty developers have a Zombies mode, but they are routinely not as good. Black Ops 6 came out this year, and that's another Treyarch game. That's the team that created the Zombies mode in the first place, and that's the real stuff that you look forward to as a fan of this mode. And I'd say so far, of the time I've put into Black Ops 6 Zombies, it is really good, though it is, like, the least innovative that they've ever been with Call of Duty Zombies. This feels very, very similar to Cold War, basically exactly the same. Like I said, every game would introduce new wrinkles to the formula, and this really doesn't do that. It just takes Cold War and makes a couple of adjustments to its systems, and that's pretty much it. This game really does feel like it's just more Cold War maps. Fortunately, Cold War was one of my favorite Zombies games. I thought they made a lot of really cool, interesting changes to the formula there, so I'm kind of okay with that. But I would prefer if it had a little bit more unique newness going on. I've only played the first two maps so far, and at the time of making this video, the third map recently came out. And they both seem good to me. The one map in a town is like your simple, less complex map, where you kind of just run around, survive, kill zombies, have a good time. And then the other map is a little more complex, a little larger, a little more involved. It's got a bunch of islands around it, and you can, like, get on a boat and go from one to the other. That's very new. Never done that before in Zombies, and that's cool. I like that. Yeah, it's good. I like it. I like Call of Duty Zombies. This seems like another good entry. I'm having some fun with it. I'd say my biggest criticism for it is the same criticism I had for Cold War, which is that as far as personality, this game is a total flatline. The older Call of Duty Zombies games had so much character, they were so funny and silly and doing all kinds of crazy shit. And ever since they did the reboot, everything's all, like, grim and serious and military, and they try to lighten it with that fucking awful Marvel humor, and I just don't give a fuck. I don't care what's happening, I don't give a shit about any of these characters. In fact, I've turned off the dialogue volume so I don't have to hear any more of these terrible lines and all the bad acting that goes with it. I don't give a shit. But overall, still a good game, still enjoying it. However, I think the most interesting thing going on in the world of Call of Duty Zombies for that sub-community of people who care that much about this specific mode of this specific game franchise is actually not in Call of Duty at all. It is actually the first time we have a competitor to the Call of Duty Zombies mode in Sker Ritual. This is an indie game that is just straight up Call of Duty Zombies, copies the formula almost exactly, but it does have a number of its own wrinkles and twists thrown onto it, and it's pretty good. I would say it's very comparable in quality to actual Treyarch-made Call of Duty Zombies. The maps are all really good. The mechanics and systems here are pretty cool. You kind of have a little bit of, like, a roguelike progression where every couple of rounds you can pick from 1 of 3 upgrades, and they all have, like, different elemental attributes, and you can combo them together for really cool effects. Interesting system, I like that. I also like how it does the random box equivalent and the weapon rarity stuff. I'm not going to get into the specifics of it, but I think it's done pretty interestingly here. I like it. It's a little less polished than you find with actual Call of Duty, but I mean, that's to be expected. Call of Duty has a quadrillion-dollar budgets, and this is an indie game made by a smaller team. You can definitely feel the lack of polish here and there, but it's totally playable, and I don't really find it gets in the way very much. My biggest criticism for the game is that all the maps are very similar to each other. They don't really introduce nearly as many, like, unique new attributes to the maps. Like, every map basically introduces, like, a new enemy type, a new boss, a new perk, a new wonder weapon. And then beyond that, they're all pretty similar. There's not that much to do on the maps beyond, like, the main quest thing. And then it's just kind of get your weapons, get your perks, get your upgrades, and survive as long as you can. You know, each map doesn't have, like, the really unique characteristics that set it apart. Like that one map in Black Ops 6 that has the boat and you're sailing around to different islands. There's nothing like that here. It really does kind of just feel like the maps are mostly different layouts. I think one of the problems that this game has is that every single map has every single enemy type in the game in it. I think they would do a lot better if they locked certain enemy types to certain maps to give a little bit more of a unique feel to each one. And I'd like to see some larger gimmicks being implemented with the maps and how you have to traverse them or what you have to do just to achieve, like, the basic survivability, like turning on power or pack-a-punch. They haven't really experimented with that stuff that much yet in this game, but I hope they do in future upcoming maps. Still had a lot of fun with it, still enjoying it, still put many hours into this game, and I look forward to what they're going to be doing with the future of it. It's a very cool game. I'd say if you like Call of Duty Zombies, definitely give it a go. And lastly, we have probably the biggest surprise of the year for me, Marvel Rivals. I didn't even know this game existed until very recently, and immediately I looked at it and I was like, nah, bro, no way in hell. Like, first of all, Marvel, ew. Like, I don't know about y'all, but I am very, very tired of superhero crap. I've talked about how I'm tired of, like, the Marvel tone and the humor many times in this video alone. So that was super off-putting to me. And then on top of that, it's an Overwatch clone, and Overwatch, ew, double ew. Like, I enjoyed Overwatch back when it first came out, but they did a lot of crap to that game to really fuck it up, and I've kind of come to resent Overwatch in many ways because of what it did to the video game space with all this hero crap, and everything has that same fucking look and tone, and I can't stand it anymore. So I was, like, completely dismissing this game. I didn't give a shit. But then I heard everyone talking about how this game is actually really great. I'm like, okay, fine. It's free to play. I'll try it. And to my surprise, everyone was right for once. This game is pretty great. I kind of love it. I've been having a ton of fun with Marvel Rivals. Like I said, I did enjoy Overwatch back when it first came out. They just ruined the game with a bunch of stupid things they did to it. And this is like back to old school Overwatch before they fucked it up. I'm sure eventually this game will get fucked up too, but for right now, I'm really liking it. But actually, I'd say I like this game more than Overwatch, because the couple of things it does to set itself apart, I think, are all really cool. It's got stage destruction, which I think is neat. It's got the combo stuff. Certain heroes have abilities that can chain off of each other. For example, if you're playing as Rocket and there's a Groot in the game, you can get on Groot and ride him around, and that gives you both defense buffs, so they work together as a combo. Or you're going to have Venom and Spider-Man on a team together, and that gives Spider-Man a symbiote attack that he only gets access to when he's paired with Venom. That's a pretty cool system, and it gives a little bit more decision-making as to what characters do you want to play to synergize well with your team. But the thing I've been enjoying most about Marvel Rivals is I find this game a little more skill-based than Overwatch was. Like, Overwatch is like a really team-oriented game, obviously, and this game is too, but I feel this game does allow for a little bit more room for a single player to really excel and make a big difference, which is something that I like in games. I'm not a very good team player. Like, I like to go online and play just by myself. So a lot of time, if it's a game where I have to rely on my teammates, you know, the people you run into online, they're completely unreliable. They're useless sometimes. So I often feel like if a game is too team-oriented, then my contributions feel worthless, and I could play incredibly well and do better than everybody else in the match and still lose because my team sucks, and that's annoying to me. So I like games that allow for a little bit more lone wolfing, and this game has more of that. The design allows for a little bit more skill emphasis to come into play. One example I'd point to that's very emblematic of this ideology in the game is Winter Soldier, who's my main. He's a character that I probably do the best with, and his ultimate, if you kill an enemy with it, or shortly after using it on them, then it instantly refreshes, and you can do it again, and again, and again, and again. If you can continually chain that ult and get kills with it, then you can keep it going. So it allows for one player to wipe an entire team if you use it at the right time, in the right situation, and really capitalize on it. And I like that kind of thing. It's cool. It gives you a moment to really feel like you just fucking destroyed everybody. But the game absolutely does not give that to you. You need to play well. You need to capitalize. You need to earn that big moment. Another thing I like about the game is a lot of characters have really cool movement stuff. You know, I love me and my movement, big 3D platformer fan, so movement shooters are my jam. And with this game, you have lots of different characters, all with very different movement options. And let me tell you, I was very surprised to see that Venom and Spider-Man have some of the best web swinging they've ever had in a video game. Like, you can turn off the easy swinging in the options, and it's like Titanfall 2-esque legit web swinging, where you aim where you're gonna connect to, and then the swing is based off that, and you can control the trajectory and everything. I was like, holy shit, I wasn't expecting that. That's cool. And they can both wall crawl on any surface and wall run. I'm like, why does this shooter have better Spider-Man movement than the dedicated Spider-Man games? And then Rocket has a bunch of air dashes he can do with a hover, and Punisher gets a grappling hook. Like, almost everyone in this game has some kind of cool movement stuff they can do, which I'm really into. So yeah, surprisingly, I've been kind of loving Marvel Rivals. Might be my favorite shooter that I played this year. But it's all purely down to the gameplay. I still don't really care for the Marvel-ness or the superhero-ness. I don't like the art style of the game too much. Like, it's like nice and the character designs are pretty good in some respects, but it's also like very generic and formulaic and by the books and like corporate market research, you know, that kind of thing. And so much about this game. Like, it's not just an Overwatch style game. A lot of it is like directly ripped one for one. Like, some characters have almost identical movesets, or they take like 2 or 3 Overwatch characters and they mix and match their abilities. It's like one of the most blatant fucking ripoffs I've ever seen in my life. But considering that Overwatch fell from grace, this is kind of like taking its place, so that kind of works. One potential problem I felt with this game, though it might be more of a me issue and I haven't really come to grips with all the characters yet, I feel this game is really friggin' unbalanced. Like, there are definitely some characters that are just straight up better than a number of other characters. And I don't just say that from a perspective of like how well I perform with the characters when I play them. I also pay attention to, like, when I see someone else playing Star-Lord, I don't feel that threatened a lot of the time. And when it comes to me playing as some of the characters, like, Mantis to me seems absolutely ridiculous. She's a healer, and she's kind of like an off-healer. Like, she's not quite as good at healing as the other characters, but she's still a very competent one. But she is an incredibly powerful character. Like, I feel like I can 1v1 many damage characters in this game as Mantis and have a pretty good shot of winning that. If you can land headshots decently consistently, she is really powerful. Like, I've had multiple games where I do the most damage and get the most kills as a healer. That's not how that's supposed to work. So maybe the game needs a little bit of balancing work, but I'm not really too bothered by it. I've still been having a lot of fun. That's one of the things I enjoy most about the game, is just picking a new character, learning their kit, going into matches, trying to figure them out. You know, there's so many characters. You get a lot of playtime just out of that. I've heard some people say that they don't like the progression of this game, that it takes too long to unlock stuff or whatever, but the only things you get in this game are cosmetic. Unfortunately, I don't give a flying shit, so for me, this is just a great free game that I could just play and have a really good time with, and just ignore all the cosmetic crap. Lastly, I have one more game that I want to highlight, but it is not a video game. It is a tabletop role-playing game. I'd like to talk a bit about the Wildsea. I've played a little bit of role-playing games with my friends in the past, but this is my first time GMing, being the game master. So I'm not one of the players playing a character. I am overseeing the rest of the game, coming up with the story, playing all the NPCs, creating all the conflicts that the heroes are going to encounter. And that's been a very interesting experience. It's kind of like a very different writing exercise, which is kind of what drew me to try GMing in this game specifically. And it's very cool, because, you know, you don't have full control like you do with traditional writing. It's all improvised, and, like, you come up with an idea for a story, but when you throw it out to your players, they're gonna take it in their own direction and do things with it. And you just gotta kind of ride that and make it work to the best of your ability, and just yes-and your way through it. It's very different and very weird and very interesting, and it's very demanding. I've done one session so far. We haven't properly started our campaign, but one of my friends had his character ready to go before the others, so I did like a little prologue one-off session with just him, and that was good, gave me a little bit of practice with GMing because it was my first time doing it. And it was a lot of fun, but it was also very, like, stressful and demanding in a way nothing ever has been for me in the past. Like, I never felt like I had to be so, like, on and activated as when I was GMing. But at the same time, once I got into the groove of it, it felt almost automatic. I was just kind of going with the flow, and I didn't really have to think that hard to keep the story going. So it was interesting. I'm very excited to start our campaign properly. And the Wildsea is a very interesting game. Like, when you say role-playing, people immediately go to Dungeons & Dragons. But D&D is just one role-playing game out of an entire medium of hundreds, thousands of role-playing games out there that focus on different things, have different themes, different aspects to them, different things they focus on. And the Wildsea appealed to me in many different avenues. One was the setting. It's very cool. The Wildsea takes place in a post-apocalyptic world where nature has completely taken over the planet. The entire thing is covered with these unimaginably tall trees. There is no solid ground anymore. Everyone lives atop the Wildsea, the ocean of leaves, and there are settlements that have formed on especially tall trees or bits of land that stick up over the forest canopy, or just like stuff that has made its way to the top of the ocean. And it's a very fragmented world. All the knowledge of the old world has been lost. People just make do with the lives they have now. And many people become wild sailors, taking on these giant ships powered by chainsaws that cut their way through the sea of leaves. And it's a very creative setting. Like, it doesn't rely on any tropes that you see in traditional fantasy. Like, yeah, there's monsters, and there's different races and stuff, but there's no elves, there's no orcs, there's no dwarves, there's none of that stuff. Instead, you have something like the Zealocrae, which is a colony of spiders that come together and form a body out of whatever they can find, or perhaps a corpse that they manage to acquire. Or you can be an Ectus, a sentient cactus person, or you can be an Ironbound, which is the soul of a shipwreck that has come to life and formed a body out of the wreckage of its ship, and has now turned into a person. See, like, interesting stuff, and one of the things that I find most appealing about the Wildsea is there's a lot of stuff the game doesn't fill in the blanks for you. Like, okay, you have the Ectus, they're cactus people. What is their culture like? What is it like to be a cactus person? The game doesn't tell you that. The game doesn't specify. It's up to the players and the table and the GM to kind of feel out what the Ectus is for them in their campaign. For you, it might just be they're people, but they look like cactuses. But someone might say, you know what? I want to really explore, like, what is it like to be a sentient plant person? Like, they'll have different perspectives on life and their goals and their interests and, like, what they even think of as a part of themselves. Zealocrae, too. Like, how do they approach being a colony of spiders? Are they, like, one being that's just made of many, or is it, like, a legion thing? Do they come to a consensus? It's all up to the players how they want to play it out and, like, build out part of the world and the lore. It's all done dynamically at the table. There are no, like, hard rules about this is this, this is that. The game is very freeform and, like, very encouraging to, like, make up your own stuff. Like, there's a lot of monsters in the book that you can use, but it also has, like, a guideline of, like, if you want to create your own creature, here's kind of the way to do it. There's abilities in the game, but it also says, hey, make up your own if you feel like it. There's no, like, world map or anything. The Wildsea's always changing, so it's very much just like, what are these settlements like? I don't know. Make it up for yourself. And that's what really appealed to me about this game. I like the setting, but also the opportunity for me to get in there and be really creative was really cool. The other thing I really liked about this game is that it's very rules light, roleplay heavy. Like, Dungeons & Dragons is a role-playing game, yeah, but also a large portion of it is this super complicated tactical turn-based strategy combat. And that's not really role-playing, and it's always been a part of RPGs that has interested me the least in the games I have played. This game doesn't have that. It doesn't have a combat system, and it has very few rules. Like, I've played some board games that have more rules than the Wildsea, because it's all very loosey-goosey. The game describes itself as fiction first. So, like, when you get into a fight, it's not, all right, everyone, stop role-playing, now roll for initiative, and then on your turn you attack. Instead, you handle combat and action scenes like you do anything else in the game. There's a couple of dudes there, they're coming at you. What are you gonna do? And anyone can do anything at any time, and it's up to the GM to kind of make sure everyone's getting their time to shine. There's no damage values, there's no stat tables, there's nothing like that. It's you narrate what you're going to do, you roll for it, and then whatever happens, the GM narrates the outcome of that and how much of an impact it has on whatever you're trying to do. And that is such a breath of fresh air to me. When you get into some kind of encounter in the Wildsea, it doesn't take an hour to get past it, it takes a couple of minutes, and it's more focused on the drama and the characters. It is really cool, and a lot about the Wildsea is really focused on the player characters. Like, it's not like, oh, here are all your cool characters, and here's what you do, and now me, as the GM, I create the bad guy, and you guys all have to beat him because I told you to. The game very much instructs the GM to, like, build the story around the player characters. What are their goals? What are their drives? What do they want? Give that to them. Give them obstacles that pertain to their characters. Let them pursue their goals and what they want out of the world. So it's very collaborative. There's a lot of riffing off of each other, a lot of like almost writing room storyboarding, like what do you want with your character? And then I'll try to work that into the story. And it's really, really cool. It is honestly the most excited I have been to play a game in years, probably since like Devil May Cry 5. I'm really, really looking forward to starting our campaign. The characters that my friends have made so far are really good, very rich and full characters that have a lot of story potential. It gets me very excited to give them character arcs and explore some cool things. Oh, I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, I'd say if you are interested, expand beyond just the world of video games and you want to try tabletop role-playing, the Wildsea, I think, is a really good place to go because it's very easy to get into. It does have a 300-page book, but the actual rules themselves fit on the inside of the GM screen, which is like 4 pages. The vast majority of it is just like stuff. Here are classes, here are abilities, here are enemies, here are things you can encounter in the world, and then it's just go nuts with it. If what you're looking for from a role-playing game is the role-playing, then I think the Wildsea is a really cool place to go, especially if you're into, like, kind of pirating, seafaring, swashbuckling, that kind of stuff. The game riffs on that a lot. There's a lot of cool mysteries in the world, like what's at the bottom, nobody knows. There are leviathans, these giant creatures out there of legend. It's got a very interesting, unique take on magic in that there isn't really any magic. There's just weird things in the world that some people kind of learn how to manipulate to their advantage to varying degrees of success. And again, that's very freeform. Make up whatever you want for your character if you feel like it. Cool game. Cool game. I'm very excited for it. I've been doing a lot of prep, probably been over-prepping. I'm pretty sure every new GM ever over-preps for the game, and I've certainly done that. So how about that? Something a little bit different for our final game in this, my favorite games of 2024. I'm not just into video games. I love board games and card games and now role-playing games as well. And who knows, maybe in the future of the channel, I'll be talking about those things as well. Well, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope that a lot of these games looked really cool to you. Maybe you'll check them out. I'll probably be talking about some of these games in more detail in the future on the channel, but for now, I'm looking forward to what the new year brings. I hope you are as well, and I hope to see you there.